Millionaire husband and pregnant mistress laughs at his wife, then she learns the hard truth. Have you ever wondered what secrets hide behind the polished doors of a millionaire's estate? Sometimes, beneath the glamour and lavish lifestyles, hearts ache and ambitions clash with devastating consequences. In this story, a once cherished wife finds herself on the brink of despair when her wealthy husband's mistress arrogantly laughs in her face, confident that she's won his heart and the life of luxury she always dreamed of. But the mistress has no idea about the quiet power the wife holds, nor the husband's true motivations. Prepare yourself for a roller coaster of betrayal, hidden agendas, and breathtaking twists that will leave you speechless. Isabella Whitmore appeared to lead a life blessed by the gods themselves. She lived in a spacious mansion perched atop the rolling hills of Pinecrest Estate, an exclusive gated community known for its manicured lawns, imported marble facades, and sleek sports cars purring through polished driveways. She was married to James Whitmore, a self-made millionaire who had constructed an empire from scratch, starting with humble roots in his father's small machine shop in Minnesota. Over the years, James expanded that modest business into a nationwide manufacturing empire worth hundreds of millions. To everyone on the outside, Isabella was the envy of the neighborhood. She had a sparkling ring on her finger, designer clothes in her walk-in closets, and dinner invitations to the most prestigious galas in the region. In Pinecrest Estate, being on the guest list at the Whitmore's annual holiday party was like receiving a golden ticket to high society. People clamored for her attention, eager to glean an invitation or a sliver of insider gossip about James's latest business venture. But behind the gates, behind those high walls, and even behind Isabella's polite smiles, lay an unsettling sense of emptiness. The quiet halls of the mansion echoed with a loneliness that gnawed at her. James was always away, meeting foreign investors in Tokyo, signing deals in Berlin, attending board meetings in Los Angeles. Whenever he was home, he was so exhausted he barely had the energy to engage in heartfelt conversations. Their once vibrant marriage was slipping into a routine of polite coexistence. Even so, Isabella never complained. She believed in supporting James. He had given her this lavish life after all, and she knew his unstoppable drive was a large part of his success. She would remind herself of their early days in a small apartment, sharing instant noodles and dreaming of a better future. But even the sweetest memories began to feel far away as their once warm bond turned frosty. Yet nothing prepared Isabella for the day she would discover she wasn't merely lonely in her marriage, she was actively being replaced. The day Isabella's world tilted off its axis began like any other. A delicate sunrise over the horizon, the gentle hum of the gardener's lawnmower, and the crisp ring of cutlery as their housekeeper set breakfast on the table. James had just returned from a week-long business trip and was apparently leaving again that very afternoon. With her usual polite smile, Isabella came down the grand staircase to see her husband finishing his coffee in the opulent, sun-drenched breakfast nook. He glanced up, offered a half-hearted nod, then turned back to his phone, texting furiously. She noticed he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his wedding band, eyes darting over the screen. A wave of worry washed through her, but she pushed it aside. Another big deal, she assumed. Another high-stakes contract. You're leaving so soon? She asked softly, sliding into the seat across from him. Couldn't you stay at least until dinner? James mumbled something about urgent business, about how everything hinged on his presence in Miami the next morning. Isabella suppressed a sigh. She handed him a napkin when he spilled a few drops of coffee, her concern deepening. James was no stranger to tight schedules, but she'd rarely seen him this jittery. When he rose to leave, he placed a perfunctory peck on her cheek. The gesture felt obligatory, robbed of genuine warmth. She followed him to the driveway, watching as the chauffeur loaded James's suitcase into the sleek black Maybach. Before sliding into the back seat, James paused to say something, but words seemed to fail him. Instead, he forced a tight smile and shut the door. Isabella's heart twisted with a strange premonition. She almost asked him to stay, to skip this one trip. But the Maybach purred away before she could speak. Trying to shake her unease, Isabella went about her day. She had errands to run in the city, a visit to the tailor, a quick stop at her favorite flower shop to pick up fresh lilies for the foyer, and then a meeting with her charity committee. It was there, at a bustling intersection, that she first spotted her husband on a sidewalk cafe terrace when he was supposed to be en route to the airport. And he wasn't alone. A tall, striking brunette in a form-fitting dress leaned in toward him, laughing with an almost predatory gleam in her eyes. The way James leaned back, looking both eager and uncomfortable, made Isabella's stomach lurch. Isabella didn't approach them right then. Shock rooted her in place. If James was leaving for Miami, how could he be here, sipping coffee with a stunning woman she'd never seen before? How did this fit into his relentless business schedule? A million questions swirled in Isabella's mind, and each one carried a stab of dread. Instead of confronting them, she left hurriedly and cancelled her errands, driving home in stunned silence. She told herself there could be an explanation. Maybe she was a client, an important investor's representative. But the way the woman's hand was lightly resting on James's forearm, that did not look like the posture of a simple professional meeting. Once home, Isabella sought solace in the silence of her library, a room that had always offered her comfort. She ran her hands over the spines of countless unread books. When she tried to distract herself by reading, words swam on the page and refused to make sense. She closed the volume, her heart throbbing with a heaviness that felt all too real. The next few days were a blur. James's short trip to Miami turned into an extended stay. The phone calls grew less frequent, and when he did call, he barely had time for pleasantries. "I'm in a meeting," he'd say. "I'll call you back." But the calls back never came. Isabella's nights were sleepless, her thoughts a tumult of doubt. She found herself checking his social media pages, his public postings from official events, but there was no mention of Florida. The newspapers and business journals made no references to James being in Miami for negotiations either. In the past, Isabella would have asked him directly. They'd built a life on trust, or so she thought, but now an inexplicable fear stopped her from speaking up. She was terrified that if she forced the truth to the surface, it would shatter her entire life. And so she remained silent, letting her suspicions fester. After a week of James's absence, a close friend from the Pinecrest social circle, Rebecca Delacroix, invited Isabella out for coffee. Gentle, refined, and always well-informed, Rebecca had an uncanny knack for picking up rumors before they hit the tabloids. As they settled into a quiet corner at a chic cafe, Rebecca hesitated, sipped her latte, and then mustered the courage to ask, "Have you seen the pictures online?" Isabella's heart sank. "What pictures?" she whispered, half hoping, half dreading the answer. Rebecca showed her a grainy shot of James walking arm in arm with the same brunette outside an upscale boutique. The headline read, "James Whitmore spotted with mysterious companion in downtown district." Isabella stared at the photograph in disbelief. Even though the images were somewhat blurred, she recognized the distinct posture of her husband and the unmistakable silhouette of the woman she'd seen at the cafe. Rebecca reached across the tiny table to squeeze Isabella's trembling hand, her eyes brimming with sympathy. "I'm so sorry," Rebecca murmured, genuinely concerned. "I didn't want you to be blindsided if this becomes tomorrow's gossip." The next day, as though the universe conspired to confirm her worst suspicions, Isabella found herself face to face with the woman in question. At the exclusive Pinecrest Spa, a place Isabella frequented whenever she sought relaxation, she glimpsed the brunette striding confidently across the marble lobby. She wore a form-fitting designer dress and diamond-studded sunglasses. The two women locked eyes for an instant, each sizing the other up. A knot twisted in Isabella's stomach. Should she approach her, confront her? The question haunted her until destiny seemed to intervene, placing them side by side in the spa's relaxation room. Quiet, tinkling music played in the background as they both sipped cucumber water from crystal glasses. The woman turned to Isabella and smiled a self-assured, almost condescending smirk. "You must be Isabella," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "James has told me so much about you." There was an edge to her tone that made Isabella's blood run cold. Her mind spun. So James was talking about her. This wasn't some secret he was trying to hide from the mistress. He'd effectively presented Isabella as, what? A tired old wife? The mother of his children? They had none another painful subject, or maybe just an inconvenient detail. Questions battered Isabella's thoughts, but outwardly she held her composure. "And you are?" Isabella managed to keep her voice steady. "Veronica Lambert," she replied coolly. "James and I have been working together lately." The hint of laughter in her eyes made the exchange feel more like a chess match than a casual introduction. She radiated the kind of confidence that came from knowing you had some unspoken advantage, an upper hand that you couldn't wait to flaunt. Isabella swallowed the bitter taste of betrayal. "Pleased to meet you," she forced out through clenched teeth, her heart hammering. She barely heard Veronica's next words about how marvelous James was, how she admired his dedication, how close they had become. Instead, Isabella felt like an onlooker at her own life, watching this scene unfold from a distance, powerless to stop it. Long after Veronica left the spa, Isabella remained seated on a chaise lounge, the air thick with her suffocated heartbreak. She replayed the brief encounter in her mind, fixating on every subtle jab, Veronica's haughty tone, her smug expression, the implication that she and James shared something secret and thrilling. But more than anger, Isabella felt a profound sense of grief. She remembered the early days of her relationship with James, how they had laughed over ramen noodles in their tiny kitchenette, dreaming of a better future. For years they'd been partners in every sense. Now she was reduced to a figurehead, while a younger, seductive woman reveled in his attention. It was a betrayal so deep it threatened to fracture her sense of self. That evening, Isabella locked herself in her bedroom and composed a text message to James. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She typed and deleted, typed and deleted. She wanted to demand answers. Who is this woman, really? Why would you hurt me like this? But each time she attempted to articulate her pain, her eyes misted with tears. Ultimately, she wrote a short, guarded message. "James, we need to talk. I know about Veronica Lambert." James didn't reply that night, or the next morning. By the time he finally responded 2 days later, it was a perfunctory text stating he was busy on a business trip and would explain everything once he got back. The cold dismissal stung more than any truth might have. She realized he was more interested in maintaining his facade of a perfect life than in addressing the cracks in their marriage. In the meantime, the rumor mill in Pinecrest Estate churned relentlessly. Whispers about James's new flame trickled through the social circles, reaching Isabella's ears through concerned or pitying acquaintances. Rebecca's gentle attempts to shield Isabella from the gossip failed. The scandal was too big, a temptation for bored socialites. Everyone seemed to know that Veronica Lambert was living in the penthouse suite of a luxury hotel downtown, one that James's company had partnered with. Between the silent phone calls and the relentless gossip, Isabella felt herself drifting into a numb haze. She desperately wished she could wake up from this nightmare. And yet, beneath her despair, a quiet fury began to simmer. She had never been a doormat. If James thought she would meekly step aside for Veronica, he had severely underestimated the woman he'd once called his better half. The anticipated confrontation took place a week later, when James finally showed up at the mansion. Isabella hadn't expected him. She'd begun to suspect he might never return. It was late in the evening when she heard the front doors open, followed by the echo of his footsteps across the marble foyer. She found him in the living room, staring at the silver-framed photographs lining the mantel images of their wedding, of their younger, hopeful faces. He didn't turn around when she entered. For a moment, she studied his posture, shoulders tense, head bowed slightly, hands clenched in his pockets. He seemed burdened by something he was afraid to express. "James," she said softly, swallowing the lump in her throat, "we need to talk." He turned, weariness etched on his features. "I know. I should have called sooner." In the ensuing silence, the grandfather clock ticked ominously. Isabella's voice, trembling only slightly, cut through the tension. "How long?" James looked away. "It's not what you think." Isabella crossed her arms, her frustration flaring. "I saw you with her at the cafe. Your pictures together are all over the internet. The entire neighborhood knows something is happening. Don't insult my intelligence by trying to deny it." A flash of guilt crossed his face. "Veronica is just someone I've been working with," he said weakly, the lie painfully transparent. "She's got connections that could help me secure a major contract, so I've—" "Enough," Isabella said, voice shaking with anger. "You can't stand there and expect me to believe it's purely business." James's shoulders sagged. Perhaps he realized the futility of dancing around the issue. "All right," he admitted finally. "Veronica is important to me right now. We started seeing each other a few months ago, but it isn't serious. It's just a temporary situation." "I never meant to hurt you, never meant to hurt her." The words stung like a slap. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "You could have talked to me if you were unhappy. We could have tried to fix things, but you decided to humiliate me instead." His face twisted with a mix of remorse and desperation. "You have to understand, I'm under so much pressure," he muttered. "She was just an outlet. I never wanted this to become public or to harm you. You have everything, Isabella. You're set for life. It was just something I needed." At that, something inside Isabella snapped. "Then go," she whispered. "Be with her if she's so important. But don't you dare come crawling back to me when it all goes wrong." Following that heated confrontation, James moved out of the mansion. He claimed he needed space and time to sort things out. In truth, everyone in Pinecrest Estate suspected he was simply dividing his time between important business trips and Veronica's luxurious penthouse downtown. Some whispered that he spent every night there, fueling Veronica's fantasies of becoming the new Miss S. Whitmore. Isabella tried to maintain her composure in public. She continued to attend charity events, still welcomed by those who felt sympathy for her or truly cared about her well-being. However, she could sense the pitying stares from certain socialites, people who once envied her. Now they watched her downfall, like it was a high-stakes drama unfolding in real time. Her darkest moment arrived unexpectedly during a garden fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, an event Isabella had helped plan months ago. Held at a sprawling estate belonging to a local philanthropist, the garden was filled with rose arches, tinkling fountains, and guests wearing elegant pastel outfits. Isabella tried to keep her head high, greeting guests cordially, but inside she was fraught with worry. James had quietly withdrawn from funding many of her pet projects, leaving her scrambling for alternative sponsors. Halfway through the event, Veronica sauntered in, turning heads in a stunning white gown. The audacity of wearing white, almost symbolic of some twisted bridal statement, did not escape Isabella. Veronica glowed with an unmistakable pride, as though asserting her triumph over the wife she deemed outdated. Stepping directly into Isabella's path, Veronica flashed a radiant smile that made Isabella's stomach lurch. "Isn't this a lovely event you've put together?" she cooed. Her voice carried just enough condescension to spark the cameras in the eyes of nearby onlookers. Isabella forced a polite nod, conscious of the crowd. "I'm glad you could make it," she replied, keeping her tone civil. Veronica leaned in, her whisper laced with malice. "James sends his regards. He's out of the country at the moment, but when he returns, we're planning a little trip to the Virgin Islands. Might do us some good to unwind." She emphasized us as if relishing Isabella's humiliation. For a moment, Isabella felt her world tilt. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, but she refused to give Veronica the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Instead, she offered a tight smile and stepped away, feeling the heat of onlookers' curiosity. For the rest of the event, whispers followed in her wake, but she refused to let them overshadow her dedication to the children's cause. Even if her personal life was in tatters, Isabella still had her dignity and a fierce determination to reclaim her pride. Amid this growing storm, Isabella discovered unexpected allies. Rebecca Delacroix, who had always been discreet and supportive, offered a listening ear and practical help whenever Isabella was overwhelmed by the mountain of responsibilities. James had left her to handle alone. Despite the chilly atmosphere in Pinecrest Estate, there were others who sympathized with Isabella. Some had endured their own heartbreaks, understanding all too well the pain of betrayal. At one of these social gatherings, Isabella was introduced to a newcomer, Sophia Atkins, a lawyer specializing in family law who had just moved to the community. Sophia was elegant, sharp-minded, and exuded a calm confidence. When she discreetly pulled Isabella aside and said she had experience assisting women in complicated marital situations, particularly those involving high-net-worth spouses, Isabella felt both relieved and apprehensive. "I'm not looking to divorce him yet," Isabella murmured. "I don't know what I want, but I need to protect myself." Sophia nodded. "That's precisely why I think we should talk. Knowing your rights and how you can secure your financial future is essential, regardless of what happens next." The two women arranged a private meeting at Sophia's new office a few days later. Sitting in a sunlit room with tall windows overlooking a meticulously landscaped courtyard, Isabella confided in the lawyer. She shared her entire history with James, how they had built a life together from practically nothing, how she had left her own budding career to support his ambitions, how she had always trusted him to be faithful. Sophia listened intently, jotting down notes in a leather-bound notebook. When Isabella finished, the lawyer's gaze softened with empathy. "I'm going to outline your options. But first, you need clarity on James's current financial state, the extent of his assets, and whether he's been transferring funds to support Veronica." A flicker of resolve lit Isabella's eyes. "I can't imagine he'd do that. But then again, I never imagined he'd walk out on me. I need to know everything." Sophia leaned forward, her voice firm. "We'll do a thorough investigation." "Knowledge is power, Isabella. And power is something you'll need, especially if Veronica thinks she can walk into your life and take everything." At that moment, Isabella realized she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. She had allies, people who would stand by her side and help her navigate the treacherous world she once believed was a fortress of security and love. And so, a plan began to form in her mind, one that would ensure she would never again be laughed at or belittled. While Isabella began her legal consultations with Sophia, she also started her own discreet investigation into James's business dealings. She reached out to former colleagues from her early career days, people with enough financial acumen to help her understand complicated corporate structures. A friend of a friend eventually put her in touch with an accountant named Marco Santiago, whose forensic accounting skills were rumored to be exceptional. Marco was a reserved man in his late 40s, with graying temples and sharp, intelligent eyes. Meeting in a quiet corner of a local cafe, Isabella handed him a list of James's companies, bank accounts she knew of, and any scraps of documents she had quietly retrieved from James's home office before he moved out. She emphasized the need for absolute discretion, terrified of triggering James's wrath if he discovered she was digging into his finances. As days turned into weeks, Marco fed her updates, suspicious transactions here, unaccounted for sums there. He discovered offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that Isabella had never heard James mention. Alarm bells rang in her mind. What else had James been hiding? And more importantly, was Veronica taking advantage of his success or even facilitating shady financial maneuvers behind the scenes? Meanwhile, the tabloids buzzed about James and Veronica's public appearances. Photographs of them dining at exclusive restaurants, attending fashion shows, and even smiling together at an investors' conference in Paris surfaced across social media. Each picture tightened the knot in Isabella's chest, though her anger at the betrayal often overshadowed the sadness. Eventually, Marco's reports confirmed a chilling suspicion. James had been funneling money into a separate shell corporation, presumably to fund lavish gifts and real estate acquisitions for his mistress. A dizzying array of transactions linked James to pricey jewelry, designer wardrobes, and a luxury apartment in Veronica's name. It seemed that beneath his facade of business expansion, James was bleeding money to keep his new flame happy. Isabella felt her stomach coil in disgust. She couldn't help but think of all the times James had teased her about overspending on small indulgences. It was a bitter irony, but she swallowed her pain, focusing on the bigger picture. She needed to protect what she and James had built because, despite everything, she still believed part of that empire was rightfully hers. She had sacrificed her own dreams to support his rise, always standing in the background while he took the spotlight. A surge of determination coursed through her veins. She had the momentum now, an upper hand James and Veronica never expected she would seize. And if the mistress thought it was amusing to flaunt her hold over James, she was about to learn just how little she truly understood the dynamics at play. Veronica, buoyed by James's seemingly limitless generosity, began showing her arrogance in more tangible ways. She wasn't content merely to bask in the glow of her new relationship. She wanted to taunt Isabella at every turn. At gala events, charity dinners, and even upscale boutiques, she made a point of flaunting her connection to James Whitmore. One evening, Isabella received a text message from an unknown number. It contained a photo of Veronica wearing a dazzling emerald necklace one Isabella recognized. She'd had once admired that exact piece in a high-end jewelry magazine, dreaming of wearing it to celebrate her 10th anniversary with James. Now Veronica wore it, posing suggestively with a triumphant grin. The accompanying message read, "Thought you'd like to see how perfect this looks on someone who can truly appreciate it." Isabella's hands trembled with rage. How dare this woman take pleasure in deliberately stabbing her where it hurt most? She typed a response, her fury fueling every word, but then she hesitated. Engaging with Veronica directly would only feed her ego, and Isabella refused to let the mistress derive any satisfaction from her pain. Instead, she forwarded the photo and text to Sophia. Moments later, her phone rang. "Isabella," Sophia said quietly, "this is harassment, plain and simple." "She's baiting you, I know," Isabella replied, "but there's nothing stopping her. James keeps throwing money at her, and it's like she's trying to push me into a corner, force me to break down." "Let her think she's winning," Sophia said with a note of calm. "There will come a time when she'll regret every moment of her gloating. Trust me, we'll make sure of it." Those words, while comforting, didn't erase the burn of humiliation. Isabella felt her patience fraying with every new photo, every whispered rumor, and every scornful smile. Veronica cast her way. Pinecrest Estate, once her haven, became a stage for this twisted spectacle, wives whispering behind her back, men offering pity disguised as polite conversation, and Veronica strutting around as though she'd already claimed the throne. But Isabella had changed. She had found an inner reserve of courage. The heartbreak that once threatened to break her now steeled her resolve. Rather than lashing out, she meticulously gathered evidence of James's infidelity and financial misdeeds. Every sneer from Veronica simply added kindling to the fire that fueled Isabella's desire for a reckoning. And deep inside, she believed that the mistress, in her arrogance, was marching blindly toward a day of reckoning that neither James nor Veronica could anticipate. Amid the chaos, a significant development loomed on the horizon: the annual Whitmore family reunion. Hosted by James's elderly but sharp-eyed mother, Lorraine Whitmore, it was an event that brought together distant relatives from all corners of the country. Every year, it featured lavish dining, family anecdotes, and business talk. Isabella, who had always been in Lorraine's good graces, found herself anxious about attending this year's gathering. With James's affair now common knowledge, how would the family react? The reunion took place at the Whitmore ancestral estate in upstate New York, a sprawling property with Victorian architecture, manicured gardens, and a sense of old money grandeur. Isabella arrived alone, her heart pounding, uncertain if James would even show his face. She soon discovered he was already there, accompanied by Veronica. Seeing the two of them walk arm in arm through the estate's grand foyer caused a gasp to ripple through the extended family. James's father had passed away years ago, leaving Lorraine the de facto matriarch, but she was not known for her tolerance of scandal. Indeed, her steely gaze tracked Veronica's every move. During the cocktail hour, Veronica made a show of clinging to James, introducing herself as his companion to perplexed cousins and aunts. Isabella kept her distance, engaging politely with uncles and nieces who seemed unsure how to address the elephant in the room. Whispers trailed wherever Veronica strutted. Did James really bring his mistress here? The impropriety stunned even those who disliked Isabella. This was, after all, a family gathering, and a deeply traditional one at that. Finally, Lorraine Whitmore made her grand entrance, descending the main staircase in a regal evening gown. Conversation hushed. She greeted family members one by one, each paying her due respect. When she reached James and Veronica, her expression remained stony. "You must be Veronica," Lorraine said icily, her voice as cold as the marble floors. "I've heard quite a lot about you." Veronica, either oblivious or brazen, smiled radiantly. "Miss S. Whitmore, it's such a pleasure to meet you." Lorraine's gaze flickered to James, then back to Veronica. "The pleasure, my dear, remains to be seen," she replied. Without another word, she turned and glided past them, stopping only to greet Isabella with a gentle pat on the hand, a small gesture of solidarity that did not go unnoticed by the rest of the family. It was a quiet moment of triumph for Isabella. Although her husband was flaunting his mistress, Lorraine had publicly signaled where her loyalties lay, and as the night progressed, that loyalty would prove to be a crucial turning point in the unfolding drama. Dinner was served in the estate's ornate dining hall, a long mahogany table set with fine china and crystal goblets. Ornate chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled Whitmore clan. Isabella found herself seated several chairs away from James and Veronica, presumably arranged that way by Lorraine to minimize direct conflict. Yet even from that distance, she caught glimpses of the mistress's victorious smirks and the uneasy tension flickering across James's face. As the first course was served, an elegant lobster bisque, Lorraine announced she had important family business to discuss after dessert. The room filled with murmurs of anticipation. It was unusual for her to schedule formal announcements during a reunion dinner. Isabella suspected it might relate to James's position in the family business, which was still partially controlled by Lorraine, despite him operating as CEO. The evening wore on with polite conversation, and James, perhaps spurred by guilt, attempted to engage with cousins and uncles in jovial banter. Veronica, on the other hand, seemed out of her depth. While she strutted with confidence, it was clear she lacked the familial connection that bound everyone else. Her comments were shallow attempts at sophistication that left many of the more cultured Whitmores unimpressed. Finally, after the main course and dessert had been served, Lorraine rose. A hush fell. The old matriarch cleared her throat. "I've gathered you all here, as we do each year, to celebrate the bonds of our family. However, this year I must address certain irregularities that have arisen." Eyes darted between James and Isabella, and a few glanced toward Veronica. Lorraine continued, her voice carrying an undercurrent of unyielding resolve. "You're all aware James has led our business endeavors to impressive heights. His father would have been proud, but there are concerns about whether his recent decisions serve the best interest of our family legacy. I must ensure our fortune is protected from mismanagement." Although she didn't say Veronica's name, the tension in the room soared. James looked distinctly uncomfortable, and Veronica's expression turned sour. Lorraine moved her gaze deliberately between the two. "I will be taking a more active role in overseeing the family trust and the business assets linked to that trust, effective immediately." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was a significant move, a show of power that could drastically reduce James's freedom to allocate funds. He would still be CEO, but much of the financial control would revert to the board Lorraine dominated. In that moment, Isabella felt something akin to hope. Perhaps James was about to face real consequences for his reckless choices, and perhaps Veronica's smug grin would finally falter under the weight of the Whitmore matriarch's disapproval. True to Isabella's prediction, Veronica's smug facade cracked that very night. She cornered James in the estate's secluded library, unaware that Isabella, passing by, could overhear their heated conversation. "You never told me your mother still had that much clout," Veronica hissed, her voice a furious whisper. "How do you expect to keep your promises if she's limiting your control over the finances?" James tried to calm her. "Don't worry, my mother's just being cautious. I still have private ventures not tied to the family trust. We can manage. You'll have everything you need, everything the first need." She snapped. "You think I gave up my life to play second fiddle to your wife and your overbearing mother? I want what's owed to me, James." There was a pause, filled with the quiet shuffle of footsteps on the library's plush carpet. Isabella could almost picture the tension in the air, James struggling to placate Veronica's growing wrath. Finally, he spoke again, a hint of desperation in his tone. "Give it time. Once things settle, we can figure out a way to transfer some assets discreetly. But we need to be smart. My mother's board members are hawks, especially now that she's suspicious." Veronica let out a scornful laugh. "I expected you to be bolder. Should I have found someone else, someone actually ready to step up?" Her words were both a jab and a threat. At that, Isabella felt her stomach clench with disgust. Was that all she was to James, a stepping stone to deeper pockets, a tool for personal gain? And was that all Veronica cared about? Money, status, the thrill of stepping on the wife's dignity? In that instant, the final puzzle piece slid into place. Veronica wasn't just a naive fling stumbling into this dynamic. She had a plan, a calculated strategy to use James's wealth and influence to catapult herself to a life of opulence. And James, intoxicated by her attention or blindly craving an escape from his responsibilities, was playing right into her hands. As the conversation tapered off, Isabella quietly slipped away. She didn't need to hear more to understand the core truth. Veronica was far from unstoppable. She had a glaring weakness, her greed and impatience. And if Isabella played her cards right, she could exploit that flaw. For so long, the mistress had laughed at her, mocking her apparent passivity. But a storm was brewing that would leave Veronica wishing she'd never crossed the threshold of the Whitmore mansion. Over the next few weeks, Isabella orchestrated a quiet but meticulous plan under the guidance of Sophia Atkins and Marco Santiago. Their strategy involved strengthening Isabella's leverage by compiling evidence of James's financial transfers to Veronica, documenting every instance of his blatant infidelity and lining up witnesses from social circles who could attest to Veronica's harassment. At the same time, Isabella began rebuilding her own identity outside of James's shadow. She had once been a talented marketing executive early in her career, and she still had some old connections in the industry. A few polite phone calls and a well-placed introduction led to freelance work, small projects at first, but enough to remind her of her capabilities. The sense of autonomy was exhilarating. Each completed project added a layer of confidence she had nearly lost in the turmoil of her marriage. Meanwhile, Veronica continued to flaunt her relationship with James, posting photos on social media from lavish resorts and high-end boutiques. She hosted a glitzy party in James's penthouse, inviting local influencers and celebrities, all while James was supposedly attending business conferences. The rumor mills churned at full speed, leaving Isabella to wonder if James even cared about concealing his duplicity anymore. Some nights, though, her courage faltered. She would lie awake in the massive bed she once shared with James, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. She questioned whether her plan was too bold, too risky. What if it all backfired, leaving her with nothing? But she forced herself to recall the sting of Veronica's mocking laughter and James's cold dismissal of her pain. She reminded herself that passivity would only ensure that she remained a victim of their cruelty. Just when Isabella's resolve burned brightest, an unexpected phone call from Lorraine Whitmore jolted her. The family matriarch, who rarely meddled directly in James's affairs, wanted to speak with Isabella privately. They met at Lorraine's summer cottage near a picturesque lake, where the older woman welcomed Isabella with uncharacteristic warmth. Lorraine poured them both tea, her jewelry clinking softly as she handled the china cups. "My dear," she said, eyes shining with regret, "I should have intervened sooner. You've stood by James for years. I can't stand to see this disrespect continue." Isabella blinked back tears. "I appreciate your concern, Lorraine, but James's mind seems made up." Lorraine's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that. I have a proposal for you, one that might help bring all this nonsense to a head and show that shameless woman the door for good." In the cozy living room of Lorraine's summer cottage, Isabella listened as the family matriarch outlined her plan. The older woman had always been formidable, a shrewd business strategist who had guided James's early ventures before passing on the reins to him. Now, she intended to wield her influence once more to protect the family's legacy and, in her own way, protect Isabella. Lorraine's proposal was straightforward yet powerful. She would publicly announce that a significant portion of the Whitmore family trust would be placed in Isabella's name, at least temporarily. The move was designed to test James's priorities. If he truly valued the family's business and reputation, he would not challenge the matriarch's decision. But if he revolted, if Veronica incited him to fight for those assets, they would reveal how far he had strayed from the family's best interests. It would also serve as a warning to Veronica. Her ability to siphon funds from James's accounts was not as limitless as she believed. Isabella's eyes widened at the gravity of Lorraine's words. "I don't want to cause a bigger rift," she began hesitantly. "I just want to protect myself." Lorraine reached out, clasping Isabella's hand with surprising warmth. "Sometimes, my dear, you must draw a line in the sand. If James and that woman cross it, they must face the consequences. I won't stand idly by while my son is led astray, or while you suffer humiliation. You were the one who stood shoulder to shoulder with him to build our empire." Though grateful for the support, Isabella couldn't shake a lingering fear. What if this just pushes James further away? Lorraine's gaze was resolute. "If that's the case, then you'll see where his loyalty truly lies. But understand this, I'm not only doing this for you, I'm also safeguarding what my husband and I worked so hard to create. Veronica Lambert has no place in our family's future. If James chooses her, he loses us." The plan was set into motion shortly after. Lorraine called an unscheduled board meeting for the family business, citing a critical update about the trust. James, who had been spending more time at Veronica's side than at the office, arrived visibly rattled by the summons. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as Lorraine stood at the head of the long conference table, reading a formal statement about restructuring portions of the trust. Isabella, seated quietly at the far end, saw James's face grow stormy as the announcement was made. Veronica, glancing around from the guests section, looked livid. Yet neither of them could directly challenge the matriarch on legal grounds without risking the entire Whitmore Empire's stability. When the meeting adjourned, Isabella felt a surge of resolve. She didn't know exactly how this would play out, but one thing was certain: the mistress would learn that the wife she once laughed at was no longer an easy target. In the days following the board meeting, rumors flew that James was furious with his mother. He attempted private negotiations to reverse the trust restructuring, but Lorraine's legal team was steadfast. As a result, he seemed more stressed than ever. Reporters, catching wind of the internal family drama, started speculating in financial columns about a potential rift in the Whitmore Empire. Meanwhile, Veronica realized the free-flowing faucet of James's wealth was under threat. Rumor had it she showed up at the corporate offices, demanding a meeting with Lorraine, only to be turned away by security. Feeling the fortress close around her, Veronica lashed out in the only way she knew, through public spectacle. She hosted an extravagant party at the downtown penthouse, inviting a swath of Pinecrest's social elite, as well as some questionable characters seeking status and gossip. Lavish decorations, a gourmet chef, and free-flowing champagne set the stage for Veronica to make a grand statement. She wasn't going anywhere. James, weary and cornered, still attended, albeit with reluctance etched across his face. Word of the party eventually reached Isabella, though she had no interest in crashing Veronica's circus. Instead, she spent a quiet night reviewing final details of her financial position with Sophia. But fate had other plans. Rebecca Delacroix, who had been coaxed by a mutual friend to attend the penthouse soirée for the sake of curiosity, called Isabella mid-party, her voice shaking with excitement. "You won't believe this," Rebecca whispered into the phone, the hubbub of the party audible in the background. Veronica just tried to make some grand announcement about her future with James, talking about how they'd be the new power couple in Pinecrest. Then, out of nowhere, James stopped her, said something about not making promises he couldn't keep. Isabella's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "He basically embarrassed her in front of everyone," Rebecca continued. "He said his mother was controlling the family trust now, and it wasn't exactly the honeypot Veronica thought it was." People started whispering. Veronica looked like she was about to lose it. A mix of satisfaction and sorrow coursed through Isabella. She had no desire to see James publicly humiliate anyone, but a small, vindictive corner of her heart whispered that Veronica's comeuppance was long overdue. "I never wanted it to become such a scene," she murmured. "Honestly, Isabella, she set herself up for it." "You have nothing to apologize for," Rebecca responded firmly. Isabella hung up the phone, her mind spinning. Veronica might have learned the first hard truth. Not everything could be bought or manipulated. The next truth, Isabella suspected, would be far more painful, and it was already in motion. As tension mounted, Isabella pushed forward with the legal process. Sophia Atkins filed preliminary documents that established Isabella's interest in the family business, citing the trust agreement Lorraine had devised. Marco Santiago provided a detailed forensic report of James's questionable financial transfers to Veronica. The aim was not only to protect Isabella, but also to cast light on any unethical or illegal activity that could harm the Whitmore family's broader interests. News of these filings reached Veronica's ears within hours. She stormed into James's office in a fury, slamming the door behind her. "You promised me security," she seethed. "You said you'd make sure I was taken care of. Now it looks like you don't have half the power you claimed." James, drained from the ongoing battle with his mother and the board, snapped back, "My family business isn't your playground, Veronica. You think you can just waltz in and take whatever you want without consequences? I'm dealing with lawyers, shareholders, and my mother on my back. This isn't some romantic fairy tale." Their argument escalated, echoing through the corridors. Finally, James's assistant discreetly alerted security to ensure no scandalous scenes spilled into public areas. A few hours later, Veronica left the building in tears, practically shoved into her waiting limo. She'd always been so confident, so superior, mocking Isabella at every turn. Now, reality was setting in. The fortress she believed was hers for the taking was guarded by gates far tougher than she ever imagined. That evening, Isabella received a call from James. To her surprise, his voice was thick with guilt. "I'm sorry, Isabella," he began, faltering. "Things got so out of hand, and I lost sight of what mattered. I just wanted an escape. An escape." The words rankled Isabella, but she held her composure. "An escape from what, James? Me? Our marriage? Or your responsibilities?" He sighed heavily. From the constant pressure, expanding the business, living up to family expectations. Veronica was a diversion, and I didn't consider the damage it would cause. Tears prickled Isabella's eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. "You caused it, James. Veronica might be manipulative, but you let her in. Now you're dealing with the fallout. I can't fix it for you." A long silence stretched between them before James spoke again, defeat ringing in his tone. "I know. And maybe I deserve what's coming, but what about us? Us?" Isabella echoed bitterly. "There hasn't been honest for a long time now. I've got my own plans, James. And if you really want to make amends, you have to prove you mean it. Words won't cut it anymore." She ended the call, emotions swirling in her chest. Perhaps, at long last, both James and Veronica were beginning to grasp the magnitude of their choices. But the final reckoning still loomed, and Isabella intended to see it through to the end. With tensions escalating, the stage was set for a final confrontation. Lorraine summoned James, Veronica, and Isabella to the Whitmore mansion, ironically, the very place Isabella once called home. The reason was straightforward. Lorraine demanded answers, and she intended to deliver ultimatums. On the appointed day, the trio arrived separately. Isabella, cloaked in quiet dignity, stepped into the foyer, recalling the memories she once shared there. James arrived, looking haggard, circles under his eyes, betraying his sleepless nights. Veronica, defiant despite the precariousness of her position, clung to James's arm, even though he seemed reluctant to acknowledge her presence. Lorraine awaited them in the majestic drawing room, a space adorned with antique paintings and an air of timeless authority. Flanked by two of her trusted legal advisors, she wasted no time with pleasantries. I have watched this situation escalate to a disgraceful level, she said sternly. James, you have allowed this woman. Her withering gaze fell on Veronica to create chaos in our family and our business. Your wife has suffered humiliation, and you have undermined the respectability of the Whitmore name. Veronica bristled, stepping forward. With all due respect, Miss S. Whitmore, James made his own choices. You can't blame me for. Lorraine lifted a hand, cutting her off. Young lady, I do not recall inviting your opinion. Let me be perfectly clear. Any attempt to claim funds or assets from the Whitmore Trust without this family's consent will be met with immediate legal action. I will personally ensure you walk away with nothing. Veronica's eyes flared. She turned to James, expecting him to defend her. But he stood in silence, torn between loyalty to his mother and the woman he had foolishly enthroned. Desperate, Veronica tried again. James and I share a relationship. He's promised to support me. James flinched, his voice a strained whisper. I promised a lot of things I can't deliver, he admitted, shoulders slumped. And this has gone too far. Lorraine's legal advisors stepped forward, handing James documents detailing the trust's restructuring and potential legal ramifications for his repeated breaches of fiduciary responsibility. The mild threat was clear: either align with the family's interests or face public scandal, possibly losing his CEO position altogether. Tears of rage welled in Veronica's eyes. She looked at James, searching for a final sign of loyalty, but found only a hollow remorse. Isabella stood silent, her gaze fixed on the unfolding scene, remembering how many times Veronica had laughed at her pain. Now, those mocking smiles had vanished, replaced by the raw horror of someone watching her golden ticket dissolve into dust. Realizing she was cornered, Veronica pivoted in desperation, launching a verbal attack at Isabella. This is all you're doing, isn't it? You've manipulated the family against James. You couldn't stand seeing him happy without you, so you set out to ruin everything. The accusation hung in the air. Isabella felt her anger spark, but she answered calmly, You brought this on yourself, Veronica. You walked into our marriage, mocking me, flaunting your affair, and you expected a warm welcome. James might have made his own mistakes, but you made yours too. You never cared about family or respect. You cared about power and money. Veronica's lip curled. Don't pretend you're some blameless victim. You weren't giving James what he needed, or else he wouldn't have turned to me. A hush fell. Even James seemed to wince at the low blow. Isabella took a steadying breath. She'd prepared herself for this exact line of attack. The memory of Veronica's cruel laughter spurred her on. You think you know what James needs? You never spent sleepless nights comforting him when he doubted his abilities. You never worked odd jobs to help finance his first startup. You never saw how much stress it took to build this empire from scratch. All you saw was the success, the big house, the fancy cars, the money. You never cared about the man behind it. Lorraine, sensing the charged atmosphere, spoke up once more, her voice decisive. Veronica Lambert, you are not welcome in this family. If you pursue James further, it will be strictly at your own financial risk. If you remain a destructive influence, we will file restraining orders, lawsuits, whatever it takes. Veronica's face twisted with contempt, tears brimming. She looked to James for a final lifeline. Are you going to let them speak to me like this? James hesitated, guilt flickering in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came. In that silent moment, it became clear he had no defense left, neither for himself nor for her. The mistress who had laughed so confidently at the wife now stood on shaky ground, confronted with the inescapable reality that her ambitions had been built on sand. With anger and humiliation warring on her features, Veronica cast a final, venomous glare at everyone present, then turned and stormed out of the mansion. Her footsteps echoed in the grand foyer a lonely counterpoint to her once grand illusions of grandeur. When the echoes of Veronica's departure finally faded, the house seemed strangely quiet. Isabella felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, sadness, and exhaustion. She had spent months locked in a battle she never asked for, and now the immediate threat was gone. Yet the damage James had inflicted on their marriage remained. In a subdued voice, Lorraine addressed her son. "James, you've shamed our family, and you've hurt Isabella, a woman who has stood by you for years. I'm not certain you deserve forgiveness, but that's not my choice to make." She turned to Isabella, gesturing for her to speak. Isabella took a moment to gather herself. Her gaze lingered on James, who looked as though he'd aged a decade in the past year. In a gentle tone, she said, "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if things can ever be the same. But I refuse to let my life revolve around this betrayal anymore." James nodded, voice choked. "I understand. I'm truly sorry." Tears threatened to spill, but Isabella blinked them back. "Being sorry isn't enough," she replied quietly. "I need time, space, and if you want a second chance, even just to rebuild a friendship, you'll need to prove it through actions, not words." Lorraine stood, walking toward the doorway. "I think that's a conversation best held in private. I'll be upstairs if you need me." She left them alone, a respectful gesture from a woman accustomed to controlling every room she entered. Silence settled between them until James ventured closer. "Everything's changed, hasn't it?" Isabella nodded. "Yes, but sometimes change is necessary. I'm not the same person I was, James. And you're not the man I thought you were." She paused, softening. "But that doesn't mean we can't find a path forward separately or otherwise." His eyes brimmed with relief. "I'll do whatever it takes to make amends. Don't promise me anything," she said, a wry smile flickering. "Just do better." They parted ways that evening under no illusions of an instant reconciliation. The future remained uncertain. But for once, Isabella felt a sense of closure. The mistress who had mocked her so viciously had learned the hard truth: wealth and status cannot mask empty intentions or shield one from the consequences of manipulation. And though Isabella's heart still bore scars, she walked out of the Whitmore mansion that night with renewed strength, ready to reclaim her life on her own terms. Sometimes the greatest triumph arises from the ashes of betrayal. In this story, a wealthy husband's affair seemed destined to destroy everything his devoted wife cherished. Yet by gathering her courage, standing her ground, and seeking the support of allies, most notably the formidable family matriarch, she revealed the harsh truth to the mistress who thought laughter and arrogance could guarantee her a new life of luxury. If you've been captivated by the twists and turns of this real-life drama fiction, we invite you to show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends who enjoy a tale of high-stakes scandal, and subscribing to our channel for more riveting stories. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you the most jaw-dropping sagas of love, betrayal, and redemption. Join us on our next thrilling journey. You won't want to miss a single chapter.